In the previous session, we looked at programming a quick and fairly simple bass, and then what we did is we examined how applying effects and processing can make such a huge difference to the overall sound of that timbre and the rhythm. So with that, you should now hopefully have a pretty good understanding that groove in dance music doesn't come from just composing a great MIDI line or for some nifty programming in a synthesizer. It actually comes from a cooperation of the MIDI, the timbre, the processing, and the effects, and it's all these working together that produce the groove for the bottom end of the record. Now, the thing is, we're not quite finished yet, because in the previous session, what I wanted to do was to just quickly show you how a simple bass timbre can be improved, and the groove can be improved through the use of processing and some effects. But that was only an example, and we still need to do more to complete that bass. But before we do that, though, what I want to do is I want to try and form some sort of continuation here, and I want to continue on with programming some timbres and showing how synthesizers and samplers can be used to produce bass timbres. Then, for the very final session, what we'll do is we'll jump back to some of the timbres that we've programmed throughout this entire DVD, and we'll apply processing effects and really complete them and finish off that groove. Now, this session here shouldn't be classed as the ultimate course in sampling or programming synthesizers. Instead, what it's going to be is it's going to be a quick look at how some dance producers make their timbres. For obvious reasons, I can't possibly go through every technique ever developed here. It'd take around 30 DVDs to do that. So basically what it is my idea of this session is to basically start you on the path to thinking that little bit more laterally when it comes to timbres and bass, by showing you basically some of the more popular techniques that are employed in the production of bass lines, such as frequency splitting, sampling, layering, and we'll also look at keying when we're sampling, and I think we'll do a bit of synthesis programming too. But from there, it's really up to you to develop on those ideas and experiment, because it's people experimenting and pushing other people's ideas further that the keys to producing great music. Now, what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to program some simple timbres, and I'm going to work in opposites how I personally prefer to work. As I mentioned in an earlier session, I personally prefer to write a MIDI bass line and then program a timbre to suit that. But what we're going to do this time is I'm going to work in the exact opposite. We're going to look at programming and sampling to produce some timbres, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick one of those timbres and we're going to compose a MIDI bass line from it. Now, as I've said, this is the opposite to how I like to work. But I know that a lot of dance musicians do work this way, since the timbre tends to inspire them. So I'm going to give it a go. I'll forewarn you now that this may not work, but if it doesn't, you'll be able to have a laugh at my expense at least. So what I think we'll do first of all is we'll program a bass that's the complete opposite of what we did in the last session. The last session was very bouncy and breezy, so I think we'll go a bit darker for this one. We'll do something typical of bass line, just a deep, I don't know, we'll do one of those pitch bending basses, I think, that, you know, they roll with a bit of pitch, or a bit of modulation, really it is, filter modulation. We'll use one of those. Unfortunately, there seems there's a major problem with our desk and it's got to be repaired, so I'm still on my laptop, so you'll have to forgive me for using this little keyboard here. But really, we'll concentrate on this anyway, and we need to get some out of this now. The sound I'm thinking of basically is quite a hollow timbre. So I mean, straight away we say that we can use a square to get that hollow sound. As always, we need to work on our amp envelope first. So what we'll do is we'll keep our attack at 0 as we do with basses, and we'll pump our decay up to, I don't know, around 70 or 80, somewhere around there. Being as this is going to bend, we want quite a long sustain on that, and we can leave our release down there for now. We can always come back and we can play with that in a little bit if we really need to. Bit bright though, I think. That's better. Now, what we need to do basically is we need to sweep that with a filter. So let's get our modulation envelope up full, and we'll have to drop that down there a little bit. Now, because we want it to sweep in, we want the attack to come in slowly, we need to increase our attack there. Bring this decay up first, I think, and get a better idea. We'll leave them both on 0 because it's the attack and decay that are really going to do this sound. That's better. I think it's better with the filter all the way down. There we get that. As always, everything benefits from modulation, so I think we'll modulate this with an LFO, I think. We'll use a triangle because the shape of a triangle is very commonly used. We'll set the speed. We want it quite fast, I think. Yeah. Let's, basically, we've got to send that. Don't send it too much. Some delay on there. Halfway. Reduce that down a little. And there we go. It's a particularly simple bass there. That reminds me of what was it called, that track? The music on that Levi's ad with that yellow puppet. Flat Eric, Mr. Ozio, I think it was, back in, was it I think it was 1999, that. You can just hear it, that tap of the key there. Alright, well, there you go, that's pretty much how you build one of those basses, and obviously we can play around with the modulation envelope there, we can. And the speed that that's set to will obviously give us our sweeping. Right, I think what we'll do is we'll move on and we'll program another one. For this next bass, what we're going to do is going to program the electro type timbre. I'm sure you know the type. It's kind of a bass, but also a lead sound. It's been used in countless records and pretty much, well, in my opinion, it pretty much defines the genre. I'm often asked how they make this type of timbre, so I think to squeeze it in here, no better place. Now, I'm pretty sure we're going to be able to get this out of the V station. We might not be able to, so we'll just keep our fingers crossed for this one, but I think the V station will be able to pull this one off. Now, what we've got to do is we've got to think of the electro type timbre first. Well, it's type of an amp pluck. So obviously we want a 0 attack, and we can pump our decay up. We'll get it up around there, I think, just around there. Our sustain, our sustain probably be around there, and I'd say our release is actually fairly long because they tail off. They tend to tail off these types of timbres. Maybe a little more on the release there than sustain. Now, we're going to need a saw wave for this because they're very bright timbre. We need a second saw wave in there, I imagine. Let's get that on. Right, I'd say detune these two. That's not get much that. It's not bad. I think we'll pump that one up quite a bit. So we get that rasp. You hear that rasp? Let's try pumping that. That's better. That's sounding better, but it doesn't quite have that electro kind of squeal on the front end. I think what you do is bring this one in as well. set that at 1. I think the saw's best for that, I think, for that top squeal. We'll bring this resonance down, and what I think we'll do is we'll use our modulation envelope, because we'll be able to make that move a little as it moves in. As I keep saying, the modulation envelope, really important. What we'll do is 0 time, we'll bring that decay up. A little bit of sustain. Get that key tracking up full for a timbre like this. And there you go, that's yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I think the real magic in that timbre comes from this. It's tuning up a square there. Square's the best for that. That really gives it that. There you go. That's how you create an electro timbre. It actually worked out quite well on the V station. That. Right. I think what we'll do next is we'll do another bass. I think this time we'll go for we're doing electro. We're doing kind of bass. I think we'll do kind of a sub bass next. Kind of a really deep sub bass that's going to melt some speakers. And what we're going to do is we're going to use Predator for this. Now, I've got to be honest, I'm not too familiar with Predator. I've had it quite a bit, but I've not actually really had time to play with it that much. So I don't know it that well. But apparently this is the dogs for basses, so we're going to give it a go in this monster. It's a 3 oscillator synth, filter, LFO, and modulation and things like that. What we'll do basically is we'll give it a go and we'll see what we'll come up with. Right, we've got to start off and get our amp envelope right. Oh, there we go. What immediate attack or 1 millisecond attack, whichever it allows us to have, and we need to pump this decay up. Quite a long decay because we do want the sound to have that on it. We want the note to sustain until we release it, so we want a full 100% sustain, and we'll leave that 8th thing there. Don't need to go too mad with the release, I don't think. That's got the general shape there. Now we want to start choosing our waveforms. Now you'd think that a sine would be perfect for this, but actually the squares provide a much better sound for the deep growling bass rather than saws or sines. So I think what we'll do is we'll choose a oh, there we go. Do we have a square wave in here? Oh, there it is. And we'll use another square wave here. Oh, there we go. I'll set that back a bit. The first thing what I'll do is detune the 2 squares from one another. So okay, and we'll detune this one as well. The 5 tune on this one. We'll go up in the scale this time. knocking one of these down, I think. An octave. We'll need to do the modulation envelope for that, so we'll take our filter cutoff down. Well, not. Up a little bit more. We want kind of. Just a bit. That's sounding better. We're getting there now. That's the kind of. We'll fiddle around with our filter envelope, see if we can get something out of this. Immediate attacks, we want it to go straight away. Actually, want quite a long decay, I'd imagine, on this. So it growls up a little bit, but it takes its time to growl up. And we'll take the sustain up. About. I've just noticed that the sustain seems to come up in percentage. And we'll set the release up. Not too long. We don't want to go too long with this release. That's sounding better already. I think we can mix these two oscillators together, try and kind of get a bit of a better. Apply some pulse width modulation to this just to give it that, a bit of a wider feel. It's sounding a bit thin. Seems to be making much of a. Oh, we've got speed as well. We'll take that speed up. I think we won't go too fast with that. Actually, isn't too bad for basses, this. I think we'll get this one up as well. Use the same amount of modulation there, but we'll use a slower speed, I think. Which gives us a slightly fighting harmonic structure. I mean, you'll probably be able to picture this in your head if you've watched the synthesis DVD. You'll probably be able to picture all this in your head of exactly what we're doing here. Let's get that speed up. Oh. That's not bad at all, actually. That's pretty. And there you go. That's how we get a bass that it's not bad at all, actually. It's certainly deep and heavy, but actually I think we can make that a bit better with some sampling. And what I'd like to do here is I'd like to introduce you to the principle of trip sampling. I think that'll be a good example to use it on that. Essentially, what trip sampling consists of is what we do is we apply an effect or a processor or even a series of effects and processors to a timbre, and then what we do is we play that out at a certain key, the key of our choice. Say it could be A, C, D, E. It doesn't really matter. And what we do then is we sample the results. And basically what that does, for example, I'll show you what I mean. what I'll do is a good example of this actually is flanger. What I'll do is we'll throw a flanger across. Now what we need to do here is we need to make sure that we're not syncing to tempo. We don't want to sync to tempo. We want the flanger to attack to attack this at different times. So you can hear it working there. Now the flangers, perhaps a little bit slower. Now what we're going to do, basically what we're going to do, we're stamping some notes there, and I'm going to sample the results. I'm just going to stamp them in at, so we'll just go at G or A, or I think we'll go at A. I'll stamp in a load of notes with the flanger running across them, and what we're going to do is we're going to export that as a long line of audio. So what we'll do is we'll start doing that now. What we need to do is basically what we've done there is we've lined up a series of MIDI notes all at different timings. We applied our flanger across it, and we've bounced it down and brought it back in, so we've now got this stereo file of the flanger acting on our bass. And you can actually see the flanger behaving differently on each note. So what we want to do is we want to go through all these notes all the way along here that we bounced out, and we want to basically find the best sounding one. Now none of these are going to sound exactly the same because the flanger wasn't synced to our tempo, so the flanger's bouncing in and out at different positions throughout. Now obviously this isn't limited just to a flanger. You can put up pretty much any processing on this bass. You could put chorus, you could put a delay. There's numerous effects you could apply on here as long as they're a modulation type effect, and they wave across at different points. Just got to make sure you don't sync them to tempo. So what we're going to do is basically we're going to have to listen to each and every one, and we're going to have to decide which ones we think are good. Now you can hear the bend at the beginning of that one, and let's have a listen to this one. Now the bend's more in the middle on that one. Actually, I quite like that one. I think I prefer that one actually to that one. I think that's a bit basic, that one. I like the bend in the centre of that note there. But of course we've got to work our way through every single note. We've got to listen to every single one here. So basically we've got to work our way across it all. We'll go on that one. I think that's accidentally two notes that were joined together when it was bounced. Now again, a different form of modulation there, high modulation. It's a shame that it's caught on that one. Never mind, we'll move on to the next one and we'll have a listen to this one. So far, I'm much preferring number 2 there. I do like note number 2 there. I think we've got something going there. Again, it's in a slightly different place, the flanger there. You can see it's like occurring there. Let's listen to this one, see how this one sounds. Oh, I quite like that. Especially like the beginning of that note there. I think I prefer that one to the second one, so that's basically our fourth note. I like that one. Now let's move along and keep on listening to these, and we'll two join together again now. Let's try this one. Oh, it's in a different position again. So there. Now we've got our note back into our sampler there. Basically what it means now is that we can play, if I just turn on the keyboard there, we can, and we now have that same flanger movement that we captured. We picked out the best note, and we've now got that same flanger capture in the same place all the way up our scales. We can write a bass line with it, and that's something that you can't accomplish. You simply can't accomplish that any other way. So trip sampling is the best way, and it's a great way to get some new sounds that you couldn't get any other way. So what we're going to do basically is now we're going to write, or at least we're going to try to write a rhythm for that. I'll just move that and close our EXS down. Right, what we're going to do is basically we're going to write a MIDI for that now, working with a sub bass, or at least a very deep bass there. So that means we need to make it a little more drawn out. We don't want short, stabby notes for this, so what we're going to have to do, we have to change the form of the cell slightly. Now, when we speak about form in music, it generally means the entire structure of the music, but we can also speak about form in the context of small rhythmic cells. And a rhythmic cell is basically any number of bars that contain our tension and release. In other words, our question and answer that we discussed is something we discussed in an earlier session. We could, for example, have 2 beats for the question and 2 for the answers. Is generally the case with techno and minimal. Or we could have 3 beats for the question and 1 for the answer, such as in tech house, or 2 bars for the question, 2 bars for the answer, as is the case with some French disco house, or 3 bars for the question and 1 for the answer, and so on and so forth. Basically, the rhythmic cell is our small package of the bass that builds that tension and then releases it. I mean, we could even split that bass rhythmic cell into 2 if we wanted, creating the question part and a separate answer part. But when we write long bass lines, like we're going to have to do here, we need to approach this rhythmic cell slightly differently, because we're going to have to use very long notes. So what we need to do is we need to think over the term of a much longer period rather than 2 bars. We need to think over the period of 8 bars. So what I'm thinking of doing now, I'm thinking we can build our tension over 6 bars and then resolve it on bar 7 and 8. And how we can do that generally is we can build up, we can repeat a build up in pitch over bars 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7 and 8 will release that tension by adding something on the end. So what we'll do is we'll have a go at this anyway. We'll give it our best shot, as they say. What we'll do is we'll knock a note in first. Now what we want to do is remember that we want to work to the rhythm here. Now these aren't necessarily rhythmic as in the sense of the ones we did earlier, where we won't knock them in with a keyboard. We could do, but for this time we can stamp these in because they're more solid. So I'm going to play back the drums so we can time ourselves with the drums here. To notice first of all there is, I'll just switch that back to a pointer, is notice how we're coming over the beat there. We're not playing on the beat when we go on this second bar there. Now if we did that, which it sounded a little bit too robotic, we'd lose our syncopation there. So what I'll do is I'll place them like that so you can hear the huge difference this is going to make. That sounds rubbish. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to add some syncopation in there. And I was doing that by listening to the rhythm and thinking, we want a new note in here, we want this to start here. So what we do is we start that before the beat, which gives us some syncopation in this rhythm, and it adds that little bit more interest. And we emulate the same at the end here by just dragging that out there, and this makes that huge difference to the bass. Do now is we'll copy that over our 6 bars like that, and then what we're going to do is we're going to work on this very final one here. We'll copy that across, I think, because we at least know the notes that we're going to be using. Oops, in that there. Let's just Get rid of those notes. Right, what we need to do, we need to work our way up to here, and then we need to come a bit different here. So let's just play this back and we'll work something out. Then what we'll do is we'll try an octave shift here. And what we've got there is, as you see, we're building up in pitch, and then at the end we go up and down, and then we give that release there by moving back down again. We move back down to release to this. So let's listen to that as a whole now and see how it comes across. That's pretty much it. I mean, that's how you accomplish trip sampling. I mean, again, as I keep stressing, these are only very simple examples just to give you an idea of how it's done. There's no need to copy me. Don't copy me exactly. I'm just trying to show you examples here now. Again, I'd spend a little while working on that. I'll probably knock a few notes about. I'm not quite 100% on that yet. We started by programming a timbre. Then we applied an effect to that timbre, a modulation time period effect. You can use flanger, you could use a modulated chorus, you could even use compression, you could use the filter free, you could use a lot of processors and effects, and basically you bounce that down then and then listen to each individual note where it comes in at a separate place. Make sure you don't sync to tempo. You bounce it down, you find out where the best note is that you've got, you bring that back into a sampler, and basically then you can build your baseline from it, and you'll get timbres that you can't accomplish any other way, and that's a technique known as trip sampling. I think what we'll do now is we'll carry on, and one thing I do want to discuss now is keying a bass. What we'll do is we'll have to reset all this again. There's no need to have any of this in here, because I want to put in a new sample in this EXS, and we're going to look how we can key basses. Now, while we're on the subject of sampling, there's one issue that I do need to cover here, and that's basically the issue of keying a bass. Now, whenever we take a bass sample from a sample CD or TV or wherever off another piece of vinyl, we need to ensure that it keys properly with our kick drum. Now, I covered this in some detail in the previous DVD, fundamental on building drum loops. And what we learned there is that every kick has a specific pitch, just like every other instrument. And if you don't work in the same key range as your kick when you're working on a bass, your music may sound great on a home stereo, but as soon as it starts getting pounded out in a club, it'll just sound absolutely horrible. The bottom end groove falls apart because none of it sounds in tune. It all sounds out of tune, and it just, trust me, it sounds absolutely horrible. I've been there. So if we sample the bass, how do we find out whether the sample of the bass and the kick are both in key? Well, it's actually not that difficult. Basically, what I've got here is I've got the EXS, and in there I've got just a basic session bass. Now what we need to do with that is we need to discover what pitch our kick is in, so we can determine what notes we have to work in when we start writing with our bass line. Now, to do this, the easiest way to do it, unless you have to be pitch perfect, is to use an FFT or a fast Fourier transform analysis. Now there's plenty of these available on the market, and they pretty much all do a good job, but if you've watched the previous synthesis DVD, you know what I'm going to pull out here. It's basically the Apple Soft, I think it is, the APEQ. Now, if you've seen the synthesis DVD, you're going to know immediately that we use that throughout that DVD. The EQ on it isn't that great, but the FFT itself is simply fantastic. So basically I'm going to use that here, and this is available on both PC and Mac, so there can't be any complaints that I'm using a PC only, a Mac only piece of software. So basically we've put it now on our bass line there. So as we play a note, we can see the frequency analysis there, and what we're going to do is we're going to put one on our kick as well. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start playback, and we're going to see whereabouts on this meter here that we get our kick, the fundamental frequency of our kick. Now the fundamental frequency there looks around dead on 50 Hz. You can see it's right in the middle there. And the fundamental will be our first loudest harmonic there. So obviously the kick, the fundamental determines the pitch. The kick there is set at 50. So what we need to do now is we need to go on here, and we need to find out where that is on here. So let's select that again. Well, I think we can pretty much say it's there. You can see there when we hit that note, we run around 50 there, dead on 50. So, and if we move higher up to G sharp, we're just a bit beyond there, and obviously higher than that, our fundamental is going to move up even higher. So I'd say there that G will fit with our key there, with our bass. It'll key in with our kick, sorry. So there we have it. That's how you key your bass. Now we know that we can write in any scale that utilises the note G. So we could even write in C major if we wanted to. As long as our scale has a G in it, we can use that and it will fit with the kick. And we can write our bass and the two will tie together and sound absolutely spot on without getting that messy bottom end. Now before we move on to the final session where we're going to be looking at processing these basses that we've built throughout this DVD, what I would like to do is I'd like to take a final look at layering bass timbres. Now that means using a couple of synthesizers mixed together to produce a bass timbre. Now you're probably wondering why would want to do something like that, and the fact is that every synthesizer has its own character. They all have the same oscillator waveforms, but it's the fact that the way in which each different synthesizer produces them is very different. So a lot of the times you'll find that it is worthwhile layering two different instruments together to create a bass. And the effect of doing that is twofold. Firstly, you can build incredibly detailed and complex basses because you're not limiting yourself to, say, 3 oscillators as we have in the Novation there. You're essentially using 6. That's assuming that the second one we bring in has 3 oscillators as well. But more importantly, if you have a limited number of synthesizers, if you only have a limited number of virtual instruments, by mixing them together, it produces a great way of disguising the sonic signature of the synthesizers. Now, I'm sure some of you there will be asking why you would want to disguise any specific synthesizer's sonic signature, and it's because if you use a synthesizer that's been used by countless artists, not only do you start to sound like them, but you tend to find that a lot of people start picking you out and going, oh, well, he's used this synth from this and this. And it's always good to have that little bit of difference in there. So, for example, if you've only got 4 synths, you've got to think the number of ways you can combine them together is going to increase your sonic signature tenfold. And it's always best to mix things together and get away from the sonic signature of one particular synthesizer. Now, this kind of approach, I've got to make this clear here, is best suited when using it on bass to bassline records, where bass is the main character, because when you use 2 or more synths and you layer them together, obviously the bass is it's going to become incredibly powerful. It's going to have a lot of presence within the mix. Of course, that's just a guideline, not a rule. I've personally layered basses in both trance and house, and I recently layered it in a remix I had to do for Kylie Minogue. We layered 4 virtual instruments together there to produce a very deep bass. It all depends on what you want to accomplish. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to program a timbre in the V station here. As you can see here, we've already got a basic pattern MIDI in. I don't think I need to explain how we've done that. You know by now how to program a MIDI bass. So we'll get straight in with programming. I'll start playing this back, and we'll start programming a bass into this first. Get a general, I think we'll go for a raspy one, and then our second bass can add the depth to it. As always, we'll just get our amp envelope done first. So we'll send this decay up. Just staying down a bit, I think. Quite a bit of release on that. Just so they're just about joining together. You can hear the notes just about going together. Just turn this up. And what we'll do is change that to a square. We'll bring in a second one here and use a triangle for this. What we'll do, we need to make that a bit stronger, I think, so what we'll do is we'll just a bit of ring mod in there. Try knocking that down just to get the ring mod really working on it. We'll bring another oscillator in here. We'll go square for that thing. Quite like a square there. Quite a raspy sound out of this one. Quite metallic-y, raspy. Put some filter modulation in. Let's just draw that back while we sort out this. quite like that for now. That's quite a raspy bass we've got there. It's quite. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a second instrument to add some bottom end to that and a bit of I think a bit of square body to it as well. So what we'll do is we'll copy that down. Just copy that MIDI down there. We'll go to this track. We'll get rid of that. I think we'll go for the Sawyer. I do like the Sawyer. It's quite deep for basses. Let's play that back. Bad together. And there we go. I mean, basically, you've got the idea there. What we've done is we've built our Timbre and V station there, and then basically we've come along with Sawyer and added some bottom end to it. And the two playing together now, they give out quite an energy there. Obviously, we're going to process that. We're going to make it better. We'll play with processing and these two, because we will come back to this in the next session. But just listening back to that now, I can hear something there that's definitely working. Definitely something there. think basically we've covered a good number of techniques in this session. We've looked at the ways that we can trip sample, we've looked at the ways we can program timbres, we've looked at layering. The basic principle behind this session was to give you a good idea of how we can produce some bass timbres. And I think what we need to do now is we need to go to our final session where we'll take all these basses that we've created throughout and we'll start processing them and we'll start making a bottom end that grooves. So let's move on to the next session and let's get all these in there and let's start making some processing and making all this really tie together to complete our grooves.